Welcome to SVM Hoopin. I'm sports editor Dan Waisner alongside assistant sports editor Christopher Heimerman. This week we're talking about the Northern Illinois Big 12 West Conference. We can start off with the boys' side. We got a big game coming up on Friday night between the LaSalle Peru Cavaliers and the Sterling Golden Warriors. LP leads the conference, 4-0 record. Sterling and Ottawa right behind at 2-1. This is a huge game for the Golden Warriors going into Friday night.
Huge opportunity. I think that if you boil it down on paper like you did in those capsules that were in today's paper, the 5 games to look ahead to, if you go position by position, LP probably has more talent. I think you hit the nail on the head in the analysis and the fact that Sterling has an opportunity with their line change mentality to wear down LP. And that's where the key is going to be for the Warriors. If they can do so, they can get right into the heat of the race. They got to play LP again on February 22nd when they come to Sterling, and they got to play Ottawa twice, with whom they're tied at 2-1. So, you know, I know we're just getting back into the swing of conference play, but they got to go into Friday's game with a sense of urgency. This is an opportunity that if they're in that game, they got to take advantage of it.
It'll be interesting to see what they can do against a post player like Jens Soderholm,
yeah,
who's got the best name in the conference as far as I'm concerned. But Sterling really doesn't have a post player like that to, counteract that. Tonight I'm going to see a game where you've got Steven Armaska and Caleb Mowry going one-on-one. It's going to be a real cool matchup. Yeah. Sterling doesn't have that post player. They kind of just depend on people, doubling down, that kind of stuff to help them out under the basket. If they can do that, keep the ball away from him, I think they'll be in better shape. Yeah,
they've got the big space heater in Bentley Grell, but in terms of the skill at that position, you're absolutely right. And they're going to have to rely on guys like Trey Whitaker doubling down. A real athletical Trey Whitaker who can help kind of neutralize him. So yeah, they're going to have to throw some different looks at him.
Yeah, and you still have Ottawa and Geneseo there right there too.
Yep.
Geneseo has 2 losses. They're 6-8 overall. It's kind of hard to tell where they're at. And your other team there is Dixon, who we know they've struggled last year. They only 1 win last year. They've got 2 wins this year. But they went to Ottawa on Friday night, pushed Ottawa at Kingman Gym, which is probably the toughest place in the conference to win. Sterling's always struggled there. Dixon struggled there. The best teams in the conference go down there and struggle. And Dixon went down there and played really well.
Yeah, and I think we were all a little bit surprised by that, but that's what you have when you've got a young team like Dixon does, and when you're starting 4 underclassmen in your lineup, you're going to see those flashes in the pan where they come out, and if they get confident, they're dangerous. Unfortunately, I know we've talked about this quite a bit, and we'll touch on it a little bit toward the end of the video, but Dixon you're going to see this from Dixon, and they're going to keep getting better. They're going to keep getting better, and then they're going to move in 2014 and 15, as it sounds, to the Big Northern West, which is just an absolute meat grinder every night of the week. So, hopefully they can make some hay this season, and it translates into next year before they make that transition.
All right, well, turning to the girls' side, I think we could have probably made this video every year for the last 10 or 12 years. Sterling's, they get through the holiday tournaments and they're over records 9 and 10, somewhere around 500, and you may not be real impressed, but then you look at their conference record and it's undefeated, 4-0, and they're in perfect position to win the conference again, and that's where they've been for the last 10 or 12 years. Part of the reason that overall record's usually not real strong, you got something like the Sterling Shootout where they usually go 1-5, 1-4, something like that.
Right.
This year the Dixon tournament also was pretty tough, so to get a loss or 2 there wasn't necessarily a bad thing. You were just playing very high level competition. Now they're focused on conference and they're in the driver's seat.
Yeah, absolutely. It's theirs to win. How impressive is it, the number of 20-win seasons on Julie Schrader's resume, considering that they go through that Sterling Shootout every year? Sterling's got a lot of girls who can do some different things. There are some players who I've seen them a couple times this season, and I'd like to see more from. Stephanie Kester talked during the preseason about different elements to her game, being able to put the ball on the floor and score from within the 3-point arc, and I haven't seen that yet. I'd like to see Gabby Sandoval, their point guard. She does a good job of facilitating, and she plays good defense. I'd like to see her knock down some shots. There are little things I'd like to see from them, but the fact that they go so far down the bench allows them to fill their roles. Then you've got Kiara Harris, who can flat out, she can do it all. She's got some range. She rebounds incredibly well. She's athletic. She runs the floor. Every time I've seen them this season, she's had at least one coast-to-coast bucket in the game. And I think the best thing that Julie Schrader can do and I'm speaking tongue-in-cheek, of course, but is to get her hands on a hyperbolic chamber and keep Kiara Harris healthy. She got dinged up a little bit last season, and that put a bit of a speed bump in their season. Came back in time for the postseason, but as long as Kiara Harris stays healthy, and if those other girls can find a way to do a little bit more in some different phases of the game, I see Sterling. I see them potentially going undefeated in the conference. They've got that rematch with Ottawa at their place January 24th. That's definitely a game where we'll be getting on the horn with Andy and the boys over at the Ottawa Times and seeing if they can help us out, because that'll be one to watch.
Well, you mentioned Harris. She fit that formula that Sterling's used to win for so long.
Mm-hmm.
They needed that player who they could dump the ball down to, and they could depend on scoring.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's near the basket, whether it's with a jumper. It goes all the way back to Devin Carball when they made the run to state. They got the ball down to her, and she was dependable to get those points. After that came Caitlin Luce, and you can just run down Alina Hamelman, Lauren Hernandez, players who you can just get the ball to and score, and then everyone else kind of fills a role. And then they depend on those kids to hit the big shot when they need to, and through the years they've done that, and that's why they end up with 20 wins more often than not.
What's impressive about Kiara is her passing ability, and when I've seen her play this season, it kind of reminds me of watching Jessie McKinley last year to this year, in just how much the entire game has grown. And Kiara's sense of the floor and the ability to make interior passes, make the extra pass, she's making people better around her.
Well, and they're not going to run away with this. Ottawa's nipping on their heels.
Mm-hmm.
They played them once. You were at that game. Right?
No, actually, Ty Reynolds
Ty
was at that one, and Angel Sierra was at that game too. You can check out the highlights at SaukValley.com.
So, and they have to go down to Ottawa, and like I said, it's going to be a hard place to win.
Yeah.
But you still have, Dixon's sitting at 2-2, 6-11 overall.
Mm-hmm.
We saw it again, just like the boys Friday night. They went down to Ottawa and pushed the Pirates for 4 quarters.
Yep.
And which is really impressive, because Brooke Bailey is their scoring, and every team coming in knows it's going to be the ball's going to Brooke Bailey, and they're going to do everything they can to take the ball away from her.
Yep.
And yet she still finds a way to score.
Mm-hmm. And we all know the cliche that we throw out every time that a team plays a team for the third time. Sterling's gotten the best of Dixon twice now, if I'm not mistaken, and they're going to play once again, and it's going to be tough to beat the Duchesses 3 times, especially if we can take Coach Luke Ravlin, if we take his coach speak at face value. If in fact those other girls are getting more confident in practice every day, in game situations, if they do continue to step up, that's when Dixon's going to become a team that could be a tripping point for the Golden Warriors.
Okay. Do you have any bold predictions for these 2 conferences before?
I do. I think the Sterling girls go undefeated.
Yep.
I think they go down to Ottawa. I think they take care of business, because they are getting better as the season goes along. It's so tough to put too much stock into what they did to Streeter on Friday night. Streeter's in all sorts of bad shape in terms of being a young team, unhealthy, injured, etc. But I was very impressed. I think Sterling goes undefeated, and I think that the Sterling boys get one of these games off LaSalle Peru.
I think Sterling wins the conference, on the girls' side.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think there might be a hiccup in there, whether it's Ottawa, whether it's Geneseo or Dixon or something like that. Mm-hmm. It seems like it always happens that way, where there's this one hiccup game where they go on the road and just don't play very well in the second half, and then lose. But I think you're going to see the same thing out of Ottawa too. I think Ottawa will either lose that game to Sterling or lose another game, and Sterling will end up with that game lead and win the conference that way. Mm-hmm. I think LP wins the boys' side, whether they go undefeated or not. I can't really say. You look at the overall records on that and the boys' side in NIB 12, and it's not like we were talking about the big Northern West, where everybody's 5, 6, 7 games above 500 or more.
Right.
You've got 2 teams above 500 in Ottawa at 11-3 and LP at 8-5, and everybody else is sitting below. Sterling's the next at 7-9. So I think LP is the most talented team. That doesn't always translate into they're winning it, but I think this year they'll take it.
God bless the Dukes and Duchesses in 2014-15. I can't come back to that enough.
Well, we've been talking about change in this conference, and we know Dixon's leaving. They're heading to the Big Northern West in 14-15. Ottawa reported earlier this week that Streeter is meeting with the Corn Belt Conference on January 15th. It's they're calling it an exploratory meeting. I never really believe in that kind of stuff. I think if you're going to meet, that's usually the first step towards joining.
They don't just meet for the sake of meeting like we do.
Yeah. But, you know, it's sort of a weird situation because Streeter tried to join the Corn Belt last year, and the Corn Belt denied him.
Yeah.
And this time, the Corn Belt's coming after Streeter and seeing if they want to join. So there might be some hard feelings there, although I do think Streeter does want out of this conference.
The whole situation, to me, this domino effect of constant changing of conferences. I know I've spent my fair share of time on the soapbox this week. I was voicing my opinion about the NHL lockout being resolved, but it's really disheartening. You watch the boys, the Sauk Valley shootout, go the way of the dodo, and Kinger said it too. Greg King, the athletic director over at Sterling, he said he's a guy who believes in tradition. And Mike Poposi echoed that. He said, you look at what's happening with conferences and that domino effect, and it's, we kind of grew up. We went to high school during the time that it was like the very end of that sort of feeling of continuity where those rivalries were always there. Shortly after I graduated from high school, they went through a conference shuffle, and it's disappointing to me because I guess maybe I'm a little sentimental like that, but I like tradition. I like rivalries. Sure, some of these teams are trying to make moves that make sense geographically and saving cost on travel, etc. But ultimately, what does it do for the games that your dad played in high school and that he remembers? It goes on through generations, and people remember those games. They cherish those games and those rivalries. I hate to see some of them going away.
Well, and for this conference particularly, I don't know what happens next. You lose Streeter and you lose Dixon. You're down to 4 on the Big North and West side. You got the Big North, or not the Big, I'm sorry, the NIB 12 West side, and then you've got the NIB 12 East side schools. You either form a 10-team conference, or you start seeing other schools start looking other ways. I don't see a 10-team conference lasting very long.
Right.
Especially, most of these decisions are based on football, and that 10-team football conference would just be, it'd be really tough. I mean, with the Morrises and the Canelands and the Rochelle, and I mean, Sterling's year in, year out good. A team like Geneseo, who's a good program, but a 4A school playing against 5A, 6A, some teams bordering up towards 7A, they're not going to want to stay there because it's going to be hard to get 5 wins when you're playing all your games within that conference and make the playoffs.
And they're accustomed to being in the playoffs every year.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, you're going to have coaches losing jobs because they're not making playoffs. You're going to have, those sort of things start popping up at Geneseo. It could be an issue with Sterling also. I mean, Sterling had a good year this year, but if you put them up against the East Side teams every week, I think there was probably 5 East Side teams on that side that would have beat Sterling this year.
I think it was, I know that I saw the Rochelle game, and I think they played, it was either Sycamore or Caneland, and they weren't competitive games. So as you're saying, another domino tips over, and it just keeps going and keeps going. So to me, it's troubling. Yeah,
and it's hard to see where anywhere close that there's schools of comparable size that you can just kind of pick up and add to the conference. There's been rumors early on Burlington Central was rumored, but I haven't heard their name for a while. So I mean, I don't know what will happen, and it's kind of worrisome for a school like Sterling or a school like Geneseo because they're kind of out here on an island. They're not close enough to the suburbs to really make that seem like it's a plausible, conference to join. And, the other direction is the Western Big Six with the Quad City schools, and they just formed, a pact with the Mid-State Six in Peoria. So I don't think that's going to change for, at least a couple years. So
if anybody's familiar with stability of their industry, it's newspaper journalists. So we know what they're going through. Hopefully down the road there's going to be some stability, but we'll see how things unfold.
All right, well, thanks for watching, and be sure to check out highlights from tonight's Oregon Rock Falls boys basketball game. It's going to be a good one. It'll be on at the same time as this one, so check that out.
See you guys at the games.